Sagan, March 1944, Stalag Luft III. Germany. Snow crusted the ground. Airmen waited in silence. The Great Escape was about to begin, and not all would live to see freedom. 10 minutes before the breakout, one man's hidden compass faltered under German suspicion. A single slip, a whispered name, would turn daring into mortal jeopardy. He saw the dim tunnel light glowing faintly beneath the door. The sound of boots echoed above, uncertain. In his pocket, a compass rested, too delicate for war. A breath, then the cover lifted. Men crouched. The escape was beginning, and danger had already found them. He heard the tunnel before he saw it, the faint scrape of a shovel, the sigh of air through a pipe made from tin cans. Beneath hut 104, the floorboards pulsed with life. Men whispered in 3 languages, the sounds stitched together by fear and precision. Above ground, the barracks looked asleep. Below, 70 men were rewriting the rules of captivity. Outside, snow clung to the wire. The sky above Sagan held its breath, pale, starless, electric with waiting. The guards moved slower that night, the cold turning their boots stiff. They did not know what was happening under their feet. Not yet in the hut, Flight Lieutenant Tim Whalen leaned over a hand-drawn chart of the compound. He adjusted a small compass, one built from a phonograph needle, a razor blade, and a magnetized spring. Its casing was brass, its face carved from the base of a condensed milk tin. Hundreds of these had been smuggled in through Red Cross parcels, disguised as board game pieces. Each was a promise that somewhere beyond the wire, direction still existed. The men worked by candlelight. Each flicker cast long, trembling shadows across the walls, faces hollowed by months of planning. Wooden beams creaked softly as air was pumped through the tunnel's hand-cranked ventilator. The rhythm matched their heartbeats. In the corner, Big X Squadron Leader Roger Bushell wrote the final notes in his coded log. He had planned this for over a year. 3 tunnels, nicknamed Tom, Dick, and Harry. 2 had already been discovered. Harry remained their last path to freedom. Someone coughed. Another checked his watch. 10 minutes until movement. The prisoners spoke little. Every sound was deliberate. A hammer tapping twice meant clear. 3 times meant danger. They had trained themselves to breathe quietly, to think in silence, above. The German sentries lit cigarettes, their orange tips glowing like signals across the perimeter. From the guard tower came the faint hum of a gramophone, a scratchy waltz drifting through frozen air. No one listening below would ever forget that sound. Asterisk. Private E, the tunnel's lead digger, wiped frost from his brow. "This is it," he murmured. His voice cracked, but didn't waver. Behind him, another man handed him a compass, small, polished, fragile. "Keep it steady," he said. "The world's waiting on north." Then came the signal, 2 taps on the wooden beam. The tunnel breathed in. The silence before escape was complete, total, human, and absolute. He saw the first man disappear into the tunnel, swallowed by the wooden frame and the dim glow of candles far below. The opening was barely wide enough for a body. The air thick with sweat, chalk dust, and fear. One by one, they slid through, faces pale, breath short, boots muffled in the packed sand. It was the night of March 24, 1944. Snow still clung to the roofs of Stalag Luft III, softening the sound of boots above. The guards stamped their feet, warming hands against the cold. Unaware that only meters beneath them, a dozen men were crawling toward the tree line. The tunnel stretched over 100 meters, a feat built by patience and ingenuity. Its walls were braced with wooden bed slats. Its air fed by bellows made from milk tins and rubber tubing. Men lay flat on their stomachs, passing the air hose forward in rhythm. Their movements silent and slow. At the far end, the exit hatch was jammed. Frozen soil had shifted, sealing the path. The lead digger, Flight Lieutenant Johnny Bull, cursed under his breath, scraping at the blockage with a homemade trowel. The candles sputtered, dimmed, revived. Minutes crawled. Above, a tower light swept across the snow, its beam slicing perilously close to the ground where freedom waited. Inside the tunnel, the air thinned. The men behind whispered encouragements in clipped whispers. "Go on, Johnny." Nearly there. He dug faster, his fingers raw, the earth finally giving way with a sound like breaking paper. Cold air rushed in. They were through. He pushed his head above the surface and froze. The opening was wrong. They had miscalculated by several meters. The exit lay short of the forest cover, exposed on open ground between the trees and the wire. The snow reflected moonlight like glass. One wrong movement, one breath too loud, and the entire plan would burn. Johnny Bull turned, eyes wide in the dim light. "We're too short," he whispered back down the tunnel. Word rippled backward through the line. A wave of disbelief that struck each man differently. Dread, prayer, silence. Roger Bushell closed his eyes. A decision had to be made. To stop meant failure. To continue meant risk. He nodded once. "We go." The first man crawled out, pressed his body flat against the snow, and began to inch forward toward the dark edge of the trees. His breath made small clouds that vanished instantly in the cold. Behind him, another followed, then another. Above them, a guard tower light turned, paused, then moved on. The beam grazed the tunnel mound, but did not linger. In the hut, the next group prepared. A compass passed from hand to hand, its needle quivering, steady, alive. "Keep north," someone whispered. Always north. For the first time in months. Men who had memorized fences and shadows began to move toward the world again, slowly, silently. Through snow and fate, he heard the guard before he saw him, the crunch of boots across frozen snow, the faint clink of a rifle strap brushing metal. The sound came closer, steady, unhurried. Inside the tunnel, breath stopped. Every man froze where he was, faces pressed to the dirt. Up top, the sentry paused, lighting a cigarette. The flare of the match threw orange light across the ground, just enough to glint off. Something half buried near the escape hole. A shovel left behind in haste. The guard bent down, brushing snow from it. The men below watched through cracks in the tunnel roof, their hearts slamming against the earth. One whisper could end them all. But another guard called from the far end of the compound. A shouted question, followed by laughter. The first guard hesitated, straightened, and walked away, shovel in hand, none the wiser. The tension held like wire stretched to breaking dot. Then came the real mistake. Inside the hut, where the next wave of escapees waited, an argument began. Someone miscounted the number of men already through. Roger Bushell had kept a strict order, 76 names, one at a time, spaced by minutes. But word from the tunnel said the line had slowed. The exit jammed again. Panic whispered through the barracks. A junior officer misunderstood the signal taps. 3 knocks meant halt, but he heard all clear. Without waiting, he sent the next man down. Then another. The tunnel filled. Air grew thin, heat rising off bodies pressed close. Candles sputtered. Oxygen thinned. Someone coughed, loud and sharp. The sound carried through the air shaft, straight up into the night. A sentry turned his head. He thought he'd heard a muffled shout, or maybe an animal. He leaned over the fence, listening. Silence. Then, faintly, another sound, metal scraping against wood. He frowned, stepped closer below. The men stopped breathing. The compass in E's hand trembled. The needle swung wildly, useless in the iron-laden soil. For the first time that night, direction itself betrayed them. The guard stepped back, scanning the ground. His eyes caught the faint depression in the snow, where warm air had begun to melt through. He crouched, brushing frost away. A thin column of steam escaped breath from the tunnel. He shouted inside. The word "run" flashed through the ranks. But there was nowhere to go, only forward or back, both ending in capture. The men in the hut scrambled, trying to seal the entrance, but it was too late. Floodlights blazed to life. Dogs barked. Sirens cut through the frozen dark. The great escape had lasted less than an hour. E pressed the compass into his chest, its needle now still. As guards thundered past above, the first shots cracked through the night. He felt the tunnel collapse behind him, a dull, shuddering groan that sent dust down like snow. The air turned heavy, thick with earth and breath. Someone shouted in English, another in Polish. Boots scrambled in both directions, forward to freedom. Backward to the trap, Private E clawed his way up, fingers breaking through the surface. The night struck him like ice. The forest was only 20 yards away. Floodlights swung wildly, slicing through the falling snow. Shadows ran prisoners, guards. The indistinguishable silhouettes of men caught between orders and instinct. A flare went up. The sky turned white. The first shots cracked across the compound, not wild, but aimed. One man fell near the wire, a dark figure folding into the snow. The rest flattened themselves, the world exploding in light and noise. Then, through the chaos, a single act of mercy. A young Luftwaffe sentry, barely 20, spotted movement near the tree line. A man crawling, half buried, trying to reach the dark. Rifle raised, finger trembling. He hesitated. Through the sights, he saw not an enemy, but another airman in a torn uniform. Boots frozen, face streaked with soot. The man's compass hung on a string, glinting faintly under the flare. The guard lowered his rifle. He looked left, saw the floodlight beams sweeping toward them, and made a decision faster than thought. He kicked snow over the small glint of metal, hiding it. Then he shouted in German, harsh, sharp, pointing in the opposite direction. There, running by the tower. The spotlight turned, chasing ghosts. The man on the ground didn't move. For a moment, the war bent just enough to let both live. When the flares died and the light receded, E crawled to the edge of the trees. He looked back once and saw the sentry standing still, rifle lowered, eyes unreadable dot in the forest. The air was thicker, quieter. Branches crackled with frost. He ducked behind a fallen log, clutching the compass to his chest. The needle no longer pointed true. The cold had magnetized the case. Still, he kept it near, as if its stillness itself could guide him behind him. The camp roared with movement, engines starting, dogs barking, commands shouted into the dark. But farther out, the woods remained untouched. Only wind and the faint creak of trees filled the silence. The sentry returned to his post before dawn. His gloves were soaked. He would never tell what he'd done. In the official reports, there was no mention of hesitation. No record of the seconds that changed to men's fates, for both. The night would remain a memory lit by flares, shadowed by silence, and defined by a single gesture, the lowering of a weapon when everything demanded it be raised. He heard the silence return before he believed it. The flares had burned out, leaving only drifting smoke and the faint ticking of cooling rifles. Snow fell again, thin and indifferent. What minutes ago had been chaos now felt impossibly calm, the kind of quiet that follows loss. Not peace. In the forest, Private E crouched beneath a pine. His breath came slow, measured. Around him, the night glowed faintly from the dying light of fires near the camp. The cold pressed through his coat. His fingers burned from it. He checked the compass again. The needle refused to move. Frozen, he looked back toward the compound. Shapes moved under searchlights, gathering bodies, shouting names. Somewhere among them, the sentry he'd seen, the one who hadn't fired, stood near the fence. Head bowed. At dawn, the wind shifted. From his cover in the trees, E could see the line of captured men being marched back into camp, boots crunching frost. Faces blank, shoulders squared from exhaustion rather than dignity. 76 had left. Most were already taken again. A few still hid in the forests or the rail yards, but their time was running short. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the compass. Its surface caught a sliver of dawn light. For a moment, it flickered a faint pulse, like life refusing to end. He pressed it into the snow, marking his place, and stood by the fence. The sentry saw him. They held each other's gaze through the haze, a distance of 50 yards and everything that made them enemies. The German lifted his hand, not in warning, not in salute, but as if to acknowledge that they had both survived something neither could name. E hesitated, then nodded once, a gesture small enough to vanish with the wind. He turned and disappeared deeper into the trees. Later that morning, the guard returned to the tower. His superior demanded a report. How many captured? How many dead? He recited numbers without meaning. When asked if he'd seen any others, he shook his head. No one, he said simply. No one left alive out there. Back in the forest, E followed the faint outline of train tracks buried beneath snow. Each step carried the weight of those who hadn't made it, names whispered once, then lost. Behind him, the camp fell silent again. By noon, the sky had cleared. Sunlight caught on the ice crystals in the air, scattering them like shards of glass. For the first time in years, he walked without barbed wire above him. Somewhere behind that silence, in a wooden hut, still smelling of smoke, a German guard removed his gloves and found a compass imprint on his palm, a mark pressed there by metal he'd never held. He closed his hand around the memory and said nothing. He remembered the sound of the engines first, low, steady, deliberate. Weeks later, in an interrogation barrack near Grillitz, you would hear it again. The soft idle of staff cars lined outside the compound. He didn't yet know what they meant. None of them did. Of the 76 who had broken free from Stalag Luft III, 73 were recaptured within days. The Gestapo handled their return, not the Luftwaffe. That alone was strange. The Geneva Convention said captured airmen must be treated as soldiers, not fugitives. Yet orders came down through channels no one questioned. The prisoners waited for transport, expecting to be sent back to the camp. Instead, the trucks divided. Some men were driven north, others south. No explanations, no lists. Just new routes, new guards, new silence. Private E sat in the back of a lorry beside Flight Lieutenant Graves, one of the escape planners. The man kept tracing circles on his knee, whispering the compass directions as if still underground. North, west, west by northwest. When the convoy stopped by a forest road, the guard stepped out, spoke briefly, and returned without meeting their eyes. Later, word spread through whispers from guard rooms, from railway clerks. From one survivor who had seen the aftermath, 50 of the men were executed on direct orders from Hitler himself. The Gestapo framed it as shot while attempting to flee, though none had a chance to run. The killings happened in pairs, beside woods and quarries across occupied Europe. Back in the camp, the Luftwaffe officers were horrified. Colonel Friedrich von Lindena, the German commandant, defied protocol to protest to Berlin. He was relieved of duty soon after. For months afterward, he spoke of those airmen with something close to grief. They were soldiers, he said. They deserved soldiers' deaths. E learned the truth only after liberation from British investigators. They found the execution sites, the bullet casings, the forged reports. By 1948, 18 Gestapo officers would stand trial. Many would hang for it. But justice, even when done, felt small beside the silence it followed. He thought again of the guard who had lowered his rifle that night. Whether that man survived the war, E never knew. But when he was asked, years later, why he carried a broken compass in his uniform pocket, he simply said, because it pointed away from hate. He felt the war tilt before he saw it. Supply trains thinned. Orders arrived late, then not at all. In the yard at Sagan, Luftwaffe officers spoke in quieter voices, their uniforms neat but their eyes unsteady. The winter light came hard and flat through the wire, as if the sky itself refused to choose a side. In a makeshift chapel, a chaplain read the names of the missing. No sermon followed, only breath turning white in the cold. The men stood because sitting felt wrong. Somewhere beyond the pines, artillery rolled like distant surf. The sound did not frighten them anymore. It sounded like an answer forming, back in Hut 104. The tunnel mouth was boarded over, a rectangle of clean timber among scuffed planks. No one spoke when they stepped across it. They had learned to step lightly over graves. E kept the broken compass in his pocket. Its face cracked, its needle stuck, the metal warm from his hand. He turned it now and then, not to find north, but to remember that north had once mattered. News arrived in pieces. A guard who had always carried himself like a schoolmaster came to roll call without his pistol. Another, the young sentry from the tower, limped to his post, then stood staring at the horizon as if something might appear there and forgive him. When the commandant was replaced, no explanation was given. The new man counted heads and left quickly, as if the numbers embarrassed him. One afternoon, a lorry clattered through the gate with crates of documents, parcel receipts, lists of camp purchases. A clerk began to burn them in an iron drum behind the administration hut. The smoke smelled of paste and old ink. The prisoners watched without moving closer. They had already learned how quickly paper can vanish and how long its consequences can remain. That evening, the chaplain's door stayed open. Men came one by one, some asking nothing, some asking whether the 50 were true. He did not say the number out loud. He said, some were taken. He said, we will remember them by name. He poured tea he could not sweeten. They drank it anyway. The next morning, a British officer stood in the yard and addressed the compound without raising his voice. When we walk out of here, he said, we will carry two things, the names of our dead and the conduct we keep now. No one cheered. Someone folded his cap more carefully than necessary and put it back on. That night, the sky over the forest pulsed a deeper red. The ground shivered once, twice. A tower light failed and did not return. The siren stayed silent. E lay on his bunk and felt the shudder run through the boards. The same tremor he'd felt the night the tunnel breathed. He thought of the men taken in pairs to country roads and quarries. Of the handwriting on false reports, of the guard who had looked at him and lowered his rifle. It was possible, he realized, that a war could end and not resolve anything. It was possible that the reckoning would be not a shout, but a long, steady breath. Before lights out, the young sentry paused by the fence where the snow had begun to thaw into black seams. He glanced toward the barracks windows and, seeing no one, removed his cap. For a moment, he held it against his chest, as if remembering an oath he had once meant more than he feared. Then he put it back on and walked his line, boot after careful boot. As if the act itself might keep some border from breaking. E turned the compass in his hand until it cracked. Needles settled against the glass. It didn't point to anything. Still, he kept it there when he slept. In the morning, the world would tilt again. When it did, he wanted to feel it. He saw the snow recede from the wire, revealing rust beneath the frost. Spring crept across Sagan in patches, green where no one had expected it to grow. The guards no longer barked orders. They spoke softly, half in apology, half in disbelief that the war was ending, done in the huts. Men packed what little they had. photographs, letters, a chess piece carved from soap. Others sat by the stove, not ready to believe the silence. For months, the world beyond the wire had been rumor. Now it came as a whisper on the wind-allied armor approaching from the west. Soviet columns from the east. Private E walked the perimeter one last time. The board still bore scorch marks where torches had burned away evidence of tunnels. A single plank near hut 104 had warped outward. When he pressed his hand to it, the wood was cold and smooth, the grain filled with dust. Beneath his palm, he could almost feel the heartbeat that had once pulsed there. That evening, the camp commandant ordered the gates left open. No speech, no surrender ceremony, just a nod to the senior British officer and a quiet step aside. The prisoners hesitated, unwilling to move first. Then one man, someone who had lost everything but his boots, walked out into the road and kept walking until his figure dissolved into mist. The rest followed. E stopped at the threshold. The young sentry stood nearby, coat unbuttoned, eyes down. For a moment they shared the same breath of cold air. The guard said nothing, only raised two fingers in a gesture that could have meant farewell or forgiveness. E returned it, then turned west, toward a horizon lit by distant artillery flashes that no longer frightened anyone. As darkness settled, the camp behind him became just-shaped towers, fences, roofs folding into shadow. The air smelled of thawing earth, of iron and smoke, and the faint sweetness of freedom. Somewhere inside the pocket of his coat, the broken compass shifted and caught the last light of day. The needle moved once, barely, then stilled. He did not look back again. He heard the wind move through the empty watchtowers, a hollow sound, part sigh, part memory. The camp lay behind him now, stripped of guards and orders, only wire trembling in the thaw. Each gust carried the faint rattle of loose metal, the same rhythm that once signaled danger. Now nothing but the earth exhaling. E stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley. Snowmelt glistened on the rails that once fed supply trains into Sagan. The sky was low and gray, the kind of sky that erases everything beneath it. He reached into his pocket and turned the cracked compass one final time. The needle no longer pointed anywhere. It only trembled as if remembering movement. He set it on the ground. For a heartbeat, the wind spun it due west, toward the direction they had all dreamt of. Then it slowed, stopped, and caught the reflection of the first morning light. The sound that lingered was not of engines or gunfire, but of boots crunching on thawing soil, footsteps moving away, countless, uncounted. The echo of a promise kept by men who refused to surrender direction, even when the compass failed. March 1944, 76 Allied airmen escaped from Stalag Luft III through Tunnel Harry. 73 were recaptured, and 50 executed on Hitler's orders, a war crime that led to post-war trials. Their courage endures in archives and testimony, reminding the world that freedom was measured one tunnel, one breath, one compass at a time. This episode draws from verified historical accounts and declassified records to explore real World War II events.